All right, moving on then to France. The kings of England had a little bit of power, but the kings of France at one point had none. When the last Carolingian was so weak and inept, the French people decided to get there to elect a king, so they elected Hugh Capet. And he started the Capetian dynasty. Now, I just told you, the French kings were going to elect the king. But the idea was that when Hugh Capet died, the French kings would elect another king. From the point of view of an American, this might sound like a great idea. However, Hugh Capet had read his Bible and noticed that when David was about to die, David had his son Solomon crowned while David was still alive. And Solomon assumed all the kingly duties because his father was too weak to govern anymore. So King Solomon took over. In the case of Hugh Capet, he had his son crowned while he was still alive. And then his son had his son crowned, and his son had his son crowned. And after a while, all the kings of France were going through the routine of having their sons crowned while they were still alive. And after a while, the French realized they had lost their ability to elect. This was to be repeated, by the way, in the 1800s when the French were promised democracy in 1792. They finally got to democracy in 1871. And there was one after another a dictator took over. Napoleon I, Napoleon III, Louis Philippe, one after another. And or a king would take over. Remember the royal family. But finally, the people of France got to democracy. But in this case, they didn't get it. Now, I want to say this about elected monarchs. It's an oxymoron, really. The Polish people elected their kings. Actually elected them. And their kings got less respect than the other kings of Europe. And Poland wound up being conquered and partitioned among its enemies. What is wrong with elected monarch? All right, if you know anything about the upper classes, you become a member of the upper classes only if you were born into it. But what if you achieve really highly? Your sons might be considered upper class, but you won't. Now, Abe Lincoln was born in a log cabin. He was never upper class, but his sons were. You follow the logic. You only get to be upper. So in the case of kings, a king got more respect if he were the oldest son of his father who was king. But what about these kings who usurped the throne? They never got quite the respect. And this was true of another one of England's King Stephen, who was not the oldest son of his father. He did not get much respect. But also the king whom William the Conqueror conquered, King Harold, didn't even have blue blood in his veins. Blue blood meant he was not even descended from kings, King Harold. So that's why he was easy to be overthrown. So an elected monarch, the Polish people tried it. The result was Poland was partitioned among three countries, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. And then Poland was off the map for about 150 years. You might be familiar with the history. And also, I've got to mention this in context of Poland. When George and I were young, there were a lot of Polak jokes circulating. Now, I'm not going to repeat any of them here. But a Polish man once asked an American and said, "Is it true that the Americans make jokes about the American hymn hall?" And I finally admitted, "Well, yeah, some of us do." And this Polish man said, "I'm sorry to hear that because the Russians do too." The Polish people, some of the smartest people of me are Polish. And yet they have done some of the worst things throughout their history that have given them a reputation of being less than smart. I want to tell you, this story about what happened at Lockheed one time. One of the engineers bought in a flashlight that wasn't working to see if Lockheed's engineers could fix the flashlight. Well, they got out a voltmeter and they decided that the battery was working. Well, they traced the voltage in to the switch and decided, well, the voltage is going to the switch. Then they traced the voltage on the other side of the switch. Well, yeah, the voltage is going through. Then they finally traced the voltage to the bulb socket itself. Then they took the bulb out and checked the continuity, and the problem was a burnout bulb. What you get is people who are just too smart. Just as simply, all you had to done was replace the bulb, and then you had to go through all this to diagnose a burnout bulb. This actually happened. I watched it from a distance. All right. Anyway, leaving that, Hugh Capet. saw to it that the French monarch was, but the first 6 kings of France did not have any authority. The result was the nobility were going around lawless and law. Finally, you got a king after 6 generations. You got a king who asserted himself, named Louis VI. But the real first king who really asserted himself, all right, and folks, now we're going to see this, I believe in your lifetime, as the government seems to get weaker and weaker in the face of the criminal element, people start demanding more authority. This is what Socrates told us 2,300 years ago. Well, the people of France began to demand, you, the king, you should do something about this. One time the king was sitting on the priest talking about how terrible things were, and the priest said, listen, you're the king, you ought to do something about it, not just sit here and talk about it. The king just sat there in stunned silence, embarrassed, and nevertheless, the first king to do anything much about it was Philip Augustus. Philip Augustus was the son of Louis VII, who had eventually been married to Eleanor of Aquitaine. Anyway, his father, after Eleanor divorced him, his father married again and this time had a son. But his father was quite a few years older than his son. So when his father was an old man when Philip was 16. All right, I've got to tell this story. Philip Augustus went hunting one day, and on his way out while he was hunting, he was stopped by a peasant who said, "Sir, I got to tell you, there's a loose nail on your horse's shoe." The young, foolish crown prince thought, "Stop for a nail, it's not worth it." So the prince rode on into the woods on his horse with a shoe that was about to come off. Well, it became a saying, because of the nail, the shoe was lost. Because of the shoe, the horse was lost. Because of the horse, the prince was lost. The shoe worked its way loose. If anyone knows anything about horses, without the shoe, the horse got a tender foot, could not carry the prince anymore. The prince had lost his way. And the prince then started to get sick and developed a very high fever. Eventually, though, the farmer who had seen him originally bumped into this crown prince, took the crown prince into his home, and was able to find the lost nail and put it back on the horse. And it became a saying also, "Save a nail, bad or worse, someday it may fill your purse." And I think of that every time I decide I'm going to throw away a rusty old nail. Save a nail, bad or worse, someday it may fill. But anyway, the nail that this farmer used filled the farmer's purse later. Anyway, the farmer realized that this was the crown prince of France whom he was keeping in his house, so he immediately sent word to the government that, "Hey, I've got the crown prince, he's very sick." When the old king heard that his son was very ill, he was beside himself with worry. It's the only son he had, but nevertheless, Philip eventually recovered. The old king was told by the church, "You've got to go to the tomb of Thomas Becket and pay respects to Thomas Becket." So the king went, and he went and talked to Henry, who had taken his first wife away, but King Louis VII was in no mood for a fight, so they had a chat. Nobody knows what they said. Anyway, to make long story short, Philip recovered. Then shortly after that, now folks, this is a mistake. You wonder, why am I still working at 69? All right. My daddy lived 11 days after he retired. Louis VII had his son crowned. All right. And in short order, Louis VII's health started to decline rapidly. He'd given up his throne, turned it over to his son, but actually he did not start getting sick until after the ceremony where he crowned his son. Then his health, and in short order, he was gone. Philip Augustus got the throne at 18. Now, what Philip is remembered for, forget about these stories so much, what he's remembered for was he strengthened the power of the monarchy. He did it the same way Henry tried to do. He strengthened the power of the royal courts. He felt like he should go on a crusade, so he went on a crusade, but he abandoned it. He went with Richard the Lionhearted. We'll talk more about this when we come to crusade. He went on a crusade, but didn't finish the job, and the crusade failed. And a lot of people thought if only he had stayed with it, because when he left the crusade, his entire army left with him. It was crusade number 3. All right, now, in the case of Philip, and the next one after him, the next important one was Philip the Handsome. In French, you call him Philip le Beau, or Philip the Beau, Philip the Good Looking, apparently. He has started the Estates General, which did not become very powerful, even though I say that tongue-in-cheek because eventually the Estates General cut one of the king's heads off. Now that was to become true of Parliament later. Parliament also cut a king's head off many generations later. But the Estates General cut off the head of King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette. So, but for the most part, it did not become very powerful. But under Philip the Fair, well, he also, like Henry II, set up royal courts. But he began to appoint his assistants rather than to go through the hereditary nobility, and he weakened the nobility by doing so. All right, again, now here is what I want to say about all these kings. The one thing they had in common, they could not rule as absolute despots. They had to learn how to govern, sometimes by marriage alliances, sometimes through bribes, and bribery was legal at the time, any way they could to get their agenda across. Holy Roman Empire. Now, the Holy Roman Empire was very important. Essentially, it came to be mostly Germany. The Holy Roman Empire's prestige was enhanced when a man named Otto was crowned. Now, in the case of the Holy Roman Empire folk, they actually succeeded in not giving the crown from father to son. In other words, when the Holy Roman Emperor died, the electors got together, and it was mostly in Germany, but sometimes they included electors from other countries. But the electors chose the next emperor, and they were careful now to choose not to choose the son of the former Holy Roman Emperor. Now, have been times when there's been a movement on, for instance, the Romans did not like it when the son succeeded his father as emperor. And generally they tried to avoid that. And then the French tried that, but they didn't succeed. The Polish people, like I say, they tried electing their kings with the results I've talked to you about. But in the case of the Holy Roman Emperor, they did not elect their emperors, and the result was they did not get a lot of respect either. Even though most of your Holy Roman Emperors were sons of kings, or sons of very high nobility, but they did not get the respect that you'd expect an emperor to get. But Otto was the exception. Otto became the Holy Roman Emperor and greatly enhanced the prestige of the office. Now, he tried, now this was a mistake that the emperor made. The emperors would try to control Italy as well as Germany, and the Italians did not like it, and the Germans didn't either, because the Germans felt like they were being left out. The Italians did not like this foreign influence, and this was to be a problem the Holy Roman Empire was to have from that time for the next 1,000 years to the day Napoleon abolished the title in 1802. The last Holy Roman Emperor was abolished by a French emperor named Napoleon. Now, Henry IV. Henry IV became Holy Roman Emperor, and he took on the church. He said that he, Henry, should appoint bishops. Now, folk, I've got to elaborate on this because I think it's extremely important. The idea of who controls whom. In the case of Europe, when the smoke finally cleared, church and state became separate. Now today, the church appoints its own bishops. That's true of every denomination. Today, the church appoints its own pastors. Again, that's true. The governor doesn't. The president does not. But Henry IV, and in view of what we know today, Henry was wrong. Henry said, I'm going to appoint the bishops. The Pope said, no, you're not. I'm Pope, and I'm going to appoint the bishops. They had a clash over it, in which, to make a long story short, Henry lost. Henry had to bow down before the Pope and do penance because the Pope put his realm under interdict. when Rome was put under interdict, that meant everybody who died went to hell. I mean, this was the rules at the time, that no marriages could be performed, no baptisms could be performed. In other words, if a person was born, he could not be baptized. And marriages were not considered valid because they'd been performed by a land that was under interdict. The Pope used the interdict in his way, and Henry had to acquiesce finally. So Henry went to the Pope's winter home in the Alps and walked barefoot in the snow for 3 days, begging forgiveness. And of course, the Pope had to take him in, forgive him, restore him and his lands, take the interdict away. But the Pope had won a battle temporarily. Again, this fight between church and state, that first few rounds went to the church, but eventually the state was recognized it had rights too. Now, I want to say too why this is important. By the way, I want to remind you too what I think you all already know. The church also appoints its own popes. There were times when the kings of France appointed a pope, but a few popes, but this basically the church today is independent, the state is independent, the two institutions try to get along. Today the Pope does not tell the rulers of Europe what to do like he once did. So they're separate. And again, a lot of persons believe that this is one reason why Europeans became the highest achievers on the globe. Islam did not and could not separate mosque from state. Mosque, and in Latin America they had the same problem. I mean, with all you respect those of you who are from Latin America did not separate church from state either. The result today in Latin America, gangsters are running the place in a lot of places, and it's really tough to be a Latin American. And a lot of Latin Americans are fleeing in droves, trying to find a better life here. I mean, all of you are familiar with that story. Again, church and state did not separate. And the church much too often would interfere in the affairs of the state and in secular affairs. In the United States, we have insisted on separation of church and state with the results that have generally been beneficial to both. The church has done well. I mean, I talked to a Chinese man one time. He looked at some of the finer churches around town and said, who pays for this? I said, it's all voluntary contribution. You mean people just voluntarily give the type of money? I said, yeah, that's right. That we do not allow our government to give money to our churches. Now, one time we did. There was a time when the state governments gave money to certain churches, but today that practice has been outlawed. All the church buildings you see, nice though they are all taken care of with voluntary contributions. I think all of you know this already. And again, the church, I think, has done well. State has done well. Church and state are separate. Now, Frederick I, the next one down, I'm throwing a lot at you. Again, folk, if I had taught this class 50 years ago, all I would have talked about would have been Western civilization. We left out all this part about India and China and Vietnam and Korea. I'm glad we teach it. I mean, it's important, especially today. But they got so bad that when I was young, most Americans did not know where Vietnam was until the war started. And President William McKinley was told, hey, we captured the Philippines, sir. McKinley asked me, tell me please, where are the Philippines? This actually is supposed to have happened. President, he didn't know. But anyway, so anyway, I'm throwing a lot at you, but these are people important in Western history. Frederick I, called the Redbeard, called Frederick Barbarossa, red-headed apparently, red beard. He tried to include Italy into Germany, and he tried to unite Germany. The result was Germany remained disunited and Italy remained disunited. Both countries were destined to stay ununited until 1870. Now I'm going to mention Frederick again. Oh yes, particularly the Italian people opposed him. But Frederick went on the same crusade that Philip Augustus did. There were three kings. Emperor Frederick, Philip Augustus, and Richard Lionhearted went on this crusade, and everybody said, the Muslims don't have a chance. But Philip turned back and went home. As for Frederick, He tried to cross the river in his heavy armor, slipped and fell, and nobody could get to him in time. He drowned in his heavy armor because he couldn't get himself back up. And that was the end of the crusade for him. So Richard had to take on Saladin by himself, and oh my. We'll talk more about this when we get to talking about the crusades in a little bit. But Frederick, he sent armies, an army of Germans to fight in Italy, to get Italy under his control. And by the time these armies, he and other emperors, by the time the armies would cross the Alps, they'd be greatly reduced in strength and size. The result was Germany and Italy kept fighting each other and never did unite. They did unite a little bit during World War II. But there was a very uneven unity where Hitler had to keep Mussolini propped up, and Hitler would have been better off. It is said that the side that Italy is on is going to be the side that's going to have a really difficult time winning, because Italy proved to be a liability, whichever side. Now, if we have any Italians here, take it up with the history books, folks. All right, anyway. Now, close to it, they were not father and son, weren't even related, but the next one, Frederick II. He goes down in history as a brilliant man, but a brilliant failure. He again tried to rule both in Germany and Italy. The Italian people opposed him. I mean, these rulers tried the same thing. In the case of Frederick, he would not take up a crusade. But instead he went to, he sent an ambassador to the Arabs and bought Jerusalem. And for 10 years he was king of Jerusalem because he bribed the Arabs into giving it to him. And the Pope did not like it. No, we want the whole Holy Land, not just the city of Jerusalem. And they said, come on, take up arms. Frederick would not take up arms. Frederick might have succeeded, but folk, he made a huge mistake one day. I mean, he was the type of man who nobody would tell him what to do, and this wound up proving to be his undoing. One day he went on a hunting trip, and I want to remind you, only the nobility were allowed to hunt. That's why in America we don't have a nobility, and we allow anybody who can get a license to hunt. And not enough of us are hunting. That's why a bunch of us run into deer all the time, and sorry, the coyotes and foxes are multiplying against us. We don't like to hunt anymore. I don't. But anyway, Frederick went on a hunting trip with his top nobility. When he got back at the end of the day, having caught a little bit of game, they thought, hey, we're going to have a feast. But he started smelling smoke. When he got back to his army, he found his entire army had been annihilated and everything burned, including his troops. And even his own admirers have to condemn him for going off on a hunting trip when the enemy was nearby, and that his troops did not have any leadership. If he and his top nobles had been there, they probably, well, for one thing, the enemy might not even have attacked him. But an army needs organization. And without him there was no organization. He lost his army. From this, he never did recover. And he died a very weak emperor, largely as a result of this fiasco.